I'm Richard Moren. I started my professional career as an architect. Then I chose to specialize in conceptual design for high-end hotels and casinos throughout the world. Since retirement, I've concentrated completely on my ceramics, and at the end of the day, I'm still creating and I'm still producing beauty, intricacy, and quality.
I'm going to take you on a journey from the beginning to the end, the finished piece. After defining the shape of the base, the next step is to begin the coiling.
The piece is very flexible, and basically I want the thickness of the piece to be slightly larger than what I intend to coil. So it'll be a little bit thicker. So when I drop it like this on the table, it actually gets longer and thinner. Now, I'm just gonna, this is my design, I like to score the exterior to get a little more detail into the lines of the coils. Now, same as last time, I'm gonna spray what would be the inside of the coil and the outside of the coil.
In this particular step, we're basically connecting all of the dots, so to speak. We've got coils that are independently formed and need to be attached to each other in order for this material to stay together.
So I'm literally just going to start working on the outside of this one, getting it into place, tying it in. Now I got to connect. I like, when I do the coils, I like to bend the tip in so it's free. I'm going to give it just a touch of water on top of this. Make sure it's moist. Set it in. Create the support. And another support. Just to make sure. Now I'm going to do one more little one. So I'm getting a relatively smooth curve here. Do it again. Make it into basically like an oval. It's got a really nice pattern to it. And I'm going to fill it right there. Now I've got a surface where I can add another coil. That's what it's going to look like until you put it in. And once you put it in, you have the choice of either expanding it by compressing it this way, which works. It actually puts pressure then between the pieces. It'll tell some of the secrets here.
How long do those have to stay on?
I'll just leave them overnight.
Okay.
And then actually the clay shrinks, so they actually are non-functional anyway. So they only work while it's still wet.
My glaze is a custom glaze that I mix myself, and what I try to get are the deep blues, the golds, and the reds, the ruby reds, the purple reds, you name it, all those colors come out of this glaze if it's done correctly. So the hardest part is to try to understand how glaze is applied It has to be brushed on for Raku pieces. So we're talking about high definition pieces or coils that take place in each of the pieces. The more definition given to these pieces or these coils, the more the glaze will break and give you a high reflection. So it's an interesting process, and it totally adds to the coloration of the piece. The pieces are preheated at that point. They're always set up on the top of the kiln. Here's an example. Checking through a small window to see what's actually happening inside the kiln. I can see the glaze. I can tell whether or not it's ready to take out. That's the only way you can tell. So I'm continually looking in. Here we are lining the reduction chamber with newspaper. We tear it up in little strips to make it start burning quickly. The piece is going to come out of the kiln at about 2,000 degrees. And once it hits that paper, it's really red hot or white hot, as you will see. And it bursts everything into flame. The flame then eats all of the oxygen once it's covered, and that's why it's called a reduction chamber. We're opening the kiln and grabbing the piece carefully, and we'll just be almost dropping it into the center of the reduction chamber. You can see how hot it is and what actually happens and transpires. Process that's really important as well, which we're showing only briefly, is the envelopment or enclosure of the reduction chamber with wet towels. The reason they're wet is so that there's no oxygen able to penetrate the towel, and it's wrapped around completely around everything. So it basically will lock out any kind of oxygen that might attempt to sneak into the reduction chamber. And that would, of course, interfere with how the piece colorates. When you open the reduction chamber at exactly the correct time, you see a piece in there that's shiny only. There's no color on the piece whatsoever. Then when the oxygen hits it from the outside air, the color just flashes like a rainbow. It's just the most incredible thing to see. Here I'm using a counterbalanced set of tongs to enable the weight to basically allow me to pick up the piece. When you're doing this, you're right over the fire, and it becomes a real challenge to be able to maintain a low temperature on your face. It's very, very hot. And the whole process is it's almost like it's an explosive fire. Once that paper starts on fire, it just becomes an incredibly hot thermal thing. These pieces, which I raise over my head and wave ferociously in the air to try to cool it and expose it to oxygen, is that I want to stop the coloration. I like the color that's there already, so I want to try to keep it there. And by getting more oxygen to the surface, you're allowing it to cool, and it cools at a faster rate. So that'll give me the colors I want.
The most important influence on my ceramics was the Jomon Society, which happened in Japan. 14,000 years ago it started. At that time, they basically started to cook in their ceramic pieces. They lived basically on islands because at that point the ocean was up relatively high, and that's all the Japanese islands were at that point, were typically just the top of the mountains. Now the Jomon Society, to make their pots exactly come right to a point at the base so that they could stick them in the sand and then build a fire around them so they could cook and use these utensils in the first probably 4,000 years. They then developed into a society, and the pots became more decorative and they were used in ceremonies, and so they became really some beautiful, beautiful pieces. They still maintain that shape, that except for the point at the bottom. So what happened was they actually ended up with a flat base so that the pieces could sit. And as they developed, they became really, really beautiful, decorative. They would put birds and images around the tops of the pieces, handles. The entire process got more and more complex. Around 400 or 4000 BC was the real highlight of this decoration and ceremony. So my examples of this Jomon typically have a small base, which then develops into a hand-built space or shape, and then typically is Raku fired. All right, this is an example of one of my pieces. The colors range from a beautiful bluish green on the interior to a more attractive, perhaps in some people's eyes, metallic copper. It has the same shape that we discussed. This going to almost to a point, but yet has a flat base. Now I've added a few decorative elements to this, like for example, this side has a crossbar in it, which actually simply just makes a beautiful backdrop for the piece.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this short journey through the process of creating my hand-built pieces and the extreme pressures they endure in a Raku firing. It's been a pleasure to share the excitement, the discovery, and the unpredictability with you.